Can you imagine finding out that your entire neighborhood was built on top of a ticking, toxic time bomb? It sounds like something out of a horror movie, right? Well, for some folks in the 1970s, it was a terrifying reality. And that crisis sparked an absolute revolution in American environmental law. So today, let's dive into the story of Superfund, the powerful tool the U.S. government created to confront its toxic past.
Here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the toxic wake-up call that got this whole thing started. Then we'll look at the Superfund law itself and figure out how the cleanup process actually works. After that comes the big question: who pays for all this? And finally, we'll see how the law got a major upgrade to make it even stronger. Okay, so let's set the scene. Before 1980, the United States had laws for managing new hazardous waste, but there was this huge glaring gap in the system. There was no federal plan, no law at all for cleaning up the messes that had already been made. You know, all the old, abandoned and forgotten toxic dumps that were just sitting there, scattered across the country. And then, all of a sudden, the problem became impossible to ignore. I mean, just picture it. You look out your window and see this strange oily goo seeping into your backyard. You smell these harsh chemical fumes rising from the ground near your kid's school. This was the terrifying day-to-day reality for families in one community, and it grabbed the entire nation's attention.
That community was Love Canal, and it became the poster child for a national crisis. The discovery that this entire neighborhood was sitting on 21,000 tons of leaking chemical waste, well, it triggered a full-blown public health emergency. But here's the really scary part. People started to realize that Love Canal wasn't just a one-off thing. There were potentially thousands of sites just like it all across America. The country had a massive toxic legacy, and Congress was finally forced to do something about it.
So let's look at how we get from this national crisis to a landmark solution. Responding to Love Canal and all the public outrage, the federal government passed this sweeping new law in 1980. It created a program that everybody would soon come to know as simply Superfund. Now, its official name is a real mouthful, CERCLA. But what you really need to know is its powerful two-part mission. First, it gives the EPA the authority and the money to actually go in and clean up these hazardous sites. And second, and this is the real game changer, it creates a system to hunt down the polluters and make them pay for it. And they absolutely meant business. The law started with a trust fund of $1.6 billion to get the work started. Now, the crucial thing here is that this Superfund wasn't just coming from taxpayers. It was mostly funded by a special tax on the chemical and petroleum industries. Yep, the very same industries that created a lot of these hazardous materials in the first place. This really highlights a key difference. The U.S. already had a law called RCRA, but that was all about managing hazardous waste being created today, tracking it from cradle to grave. CERCLA was designed to do something totally different. It was built to go back in time, to find the toxic messes of the past and to clean them up. One's about managing the present, the other is all about fixing the past.
So, we have a law, we have a fund, but how does a contaminated site actually get cleaned up? Well, it is not a quick fix. CERCLA set up a very careful, scientific, and step-by-step process to make sure the job gets done right.
Let's just walk through a quick example. Imagine there's an old abandoned factory. The journey starts with step 1, the assessment. Maybe a local spots some leaking barrels. Officials come out, take a few samples, and confirm there's a problem. That kicks off step 2, the deep dive investigation. Scientists could spend years mapping out exactly what chemicals are in the soil and water. Once they have a solid plan, we hit step 3, the remedy. This is when the EPA issues an official cleanup plan. Then, finally, the real work begins. Step 4, the cleanup. This is when you see bulldozers and crews in hazmat suits actually removing the bad stuff. And even when that's done, there's a final critical step, long-term monitoring, to make sure the site stays safe for good. This brings us to one of the most powerful parts of the Superfund law, liability. I mean, cleaning up these sites can cost millions, even billions of dollars. So the big question has always been, who pays? CERCLA's answer is pretty simple in principle. The polluter pays. And the law casts an incredibly wide net to find the responsible parties. The whole point is to make sure taxpayers aren't left holding the bag. So liability could fall on the current owner of the land, even if they just bought it. It could be the person who owned it back when the dumping happened. It could be a company that arranged for the waste to be taken there. It could even be the company that physically hauled it. As you can imagine, this is a great tool for funding cleanups, but it also leads to some really intense legal battles.
After about 5 years of putting Superfund into practice, it was pretty clear that while it was a great start, it needed some upgrades. The first batch of money was running out, and some parts of the law needed to be tougher. So, in 1986, Congress passed a major update. This was the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, or just SARA for short. And this was not a minor tweak. SARA re-upped the program and dramatically increased the Superfund trust to $8.5 billion. This sent a really clear message that the U.S. was doubling down on its promise to clean up its toxic past.
But SARA wasn't just about the money. It also created a way to protect people who might buy contaminated land without even knowing it. It's called the innocent landowner defense, and it basically means you can be protected from having to pay for the cleanup, but only if you can prove you did your homework before you bought the property. So what does doing your homework actually mean? Well, the law calls it an appropriate inquiry. To use this defense, a court's going to want to know things like, did you have some special knowledge? Was the price so low it was a red flag? Were there obvious signs of contamination you should have noticed? This one part of SARA basically created a whole new industry of environmental site assessments. It completely changed how commercial real estate is bought and sold in America.
And SARA had one more huge innovation. After the horrible Bhopal chemical disaster in India, this law added powerful community right-to-know rules. This meant industries had to publicly report what hazardous chemicals they were using and releasing. This gave communities the information they needed to understand the risks around them and plan for emergencies, a massive step forward for transparency and public safety.
So from that terrifying wake-up call at Love Canal, Superfund and its update, SARA, created this powerful system for cleanup and accountability that's transformed thousands of toxic sites. But it also created a really complex and often very slow legal and scientific process. And that leaves us with one final thought. As we face new challenges like forever chemicals and climate change-related contamination, is the polluter pays model that was designed back in 1980 still the right tool for the job?